It happened at our family barbecue, right in my own backyard. My daughter-in-law Marisa walked up behind me while I was holding a glass of iced tea and shoved me straight into the pool. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe, and please tell me and others what's one life lesson everyone should hear before it's too late. Share it in the comments below. Thanks. Everyone around started laughing like it was some funny TV show, but I couldn't swim. My chest felt like it was on fire as I choked on water, kicking and flailing my arms, trying not to sink. When I finally pulled myself up to the side of the pool, coughing and gasping for air, I looked up and saw Marisa smirking down at me. She held her fancy drink and said, "Come on, Ellie, it's a heat wave, you should thank me." My heart was beating so fast, partly from fear and partly from how embarrassed I was. Everyone else thought it was hilarious. My son Derek just shook his head and called out, "Mom's making a big deal again," before turning away to grab another beer. Only my grandson Luke seemed to care. He rushed over, kicked off his shoes, and jumped in to help me. He pulled me to the edge and handed me a towel. My wet dress stuck to my skin, and I could feel the scrape on my knee throbbing. I sat there shivering while everyone else went right back to their chatting in country music like nothing had happened. That night, after everyone left, I peeled off my soggy clothes and took a long shower to wash off the chlorine. I sat on the edge of my bed, turned on the little lamp by my late husband's picture, and whispered, "Walter, they think I'm weak." I looked at the bruise on my arm in the mirror and felt something shift deep inside me. I wasn't going to cry, I wasn't going to yell, but I decided right then that I would remember every single thing, and one day, I'd make sure they understood they couldn't treat me like this forever. The next morning Marisa invited me to brunch, acting like nothing had happened, even though it was already so hot outside. I wore long sleeves to hide my bruises. When I got there, she gave me that fake smile and said, "Ellie, you made it. Hope you're not still upset about the pool." She laughed as if it was all just a silly joke. Derek was there too, staring at his phone, not paying me any attention. I ordered coffee and toast and tried to keep my hands steady. Then, as if she couldn't help herself, Marisa leaned over to pour creamer into my coffee even though I didn't ask. She accidentally tipped the whole cup into my lap. The hot coffee soaked through my jeans, and I gasped because it stung so much. For a second, nobody said a word. Then she started giggling again. "Oh my God, I'm so clumsy," she said, dabbing me with a napkin that didn't help at all. Derek finally looked up and muttered, "Mom, relax. It's just coffee. Don't be so sensitive." That was the moment I knew for sure. No one was going to stand up for me but me. I excused myself and sat in the bathroom stall, my hands shaking not from the burn but from how angry I was. On the ride home, I didn't say a single word. When I got back to my house, I locked the front door behind me. I walked straight to the study and opened the cabinet my husband once told me about. He said only to use it if I ever felt truly unsafe. Inside was an old folder with his handwriting on the front. It said, "For Ellie, trust no one." My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside were papers that were going to change everything. I had never seen any of those papers before. There were old investment documents, a signed power of attorney, and a business card with the name Tara Miles on it. Next to her name, my husband had written, "Financial fraud expert." I stared at her phone number for a long time. My hands were shaking, but I finally picked up the phone and called. It only rang twice before a woman answered, her voice calm and steady. "Tara speaking," she said. I took a deep breath. "My name is Ella Lanner Benson. My husband left your name in some papers. He said to call you if things ever got really bad." There was a short pause. Then she asked, "Are you safe right now?" I looked down at the wet spot on my jeans where the coffee had burned me and felt the sting starting to blister. "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." Tara told me she could meet me the next morning, that it was better to talk face to face. After I hung up, I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still trembling. I looked out the window at that fancy fire pit Marisa had put in, right where Walter used to grow his tulips. I whispered, "They think I'm too tired to fight back. They have no idea what I've been keeping to myself." I opened the drawer where I used to keep my grocery lists and pulled out an old notebook. This time, I didn't write shopping items. I started writing down every single thing Marisa had ever done to me, dates, times, who was there. It wasn't just about getting even anymore. It was about staying alive. The next morning, Tara was waiting in her car when I stepped outside. I held Walter's folder tight against my chest like a shield. She didn't ask me any small talk. She just nodded and let me climb in. We drove to a little cafe about 20 minutes away. I was glad it wasn't somewhere I knew. Inside, we sat at a table in the back corner. I handed her the folder, and she flipped through it fast, her eyes sharp and serious. "Your husband was smart," she said softly. "This is all set up well, but someone has been taking money out of these accounts, and they're using an old version of your signature. It doesn't match the one you use now." My heart started to pound. "What do you mean?" I asked. Tara looked me right in the eye. "Someone is pretending to be you. They're signing forms to move money around. From what I can see, it's being sent through fake companies that lead straight back to your son's household." I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't want to believe Derek would do that, but Marissa, that I could believe without much effort. "What happens if I don't do anything?" I whispered. Tara shut the folder and let out a slow breath. "You'll be blamed for tax fraud. You'll lose everything. And if this goes public, they'll say you were the one hiding the money." That night, back at home, Marissa threw another one of her parties. It wasn't anybody's birthday, just one of those fancy charity nights she liked to host for causes I'd never even heard of. I wasn't invited. I sat upstairs by the window, watching strangers walk around the yard, sipping drinks under strings of twinkle lights. They stood right on top of where Walter's memorial bench used to be before she moved it out of the way for caterers. Through the window, I heard her say to some woman in a white dress, "Ellie's not really part of the family anymore. We're looking at assisted living. She's been slipping." I felt my hand grip the curtain so hard it hurt. She was going to erase me right in front of everyone and call it kindness later. Later that night, I came down to get a glass of water. Marissa was standing alone, tapping out a text on her phone. She didn't look up. "You really should get more rest," she said in that cold, sugary voice. "These events are a lot for someone your age." I didn't answer. I just stared at her while she smiled, not a nice smile, and walked away. The next day, when Derek and Marissa were out, I pulled Luke aside. I handed him a copy of one of the fake papers Tara had given me. He looked it over, his forehead wrinkling. "Grandma," he said slowly, "this isn't your handwriting." "Exactly," I told him. "Someone wants me out of the picture, and they're using my name to do it." He was quiet for a long time, then asked, "What do you want me to do?" I looked him straight in the eyes. "Just keep watching, and don't trust anyone whose smile doesn't reach their eyes." That night, I opened the drawer and took out the little audio recorder Walter used to use when he had business calls. I placed it on the floor just outside the dining room and waited. It didn't take long. Within hours, I caught Marissa on tape, laughing over wine with her friend. She said, "Nothing's official until the old woman's out of the way." I saved the recording to a flash drive, slipped it into an envelope marked for Tara, and hid it under a loose floorboard in my closet. I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't going to scream or make a scene. I was going to keep recording, keep writing, and slowly, piece by piece, I was building something Marissa would never see coming. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table. Marissa breezed past me in her sunglasses and gym clothes, telling Derek she was off to some board meeting. But I knew there wasn't any board in the world that needed leggings and a green smoothie. And I waited. I heard the garage door close before I picked up the phone and called Tara. We met again, but this time it was in a lawyer's office she trusted. The building was small but neat, and Tara's voice sounded more serious than before. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "We need to act now." She opened her laptop and spread out copies of the forged documents next to Walter's real records. She explained that Walter had set up these accounts in a way that protected me. They were layered with legal steps that would only kick in if I were declared too sick in the mind to make decisions, or if I died. Marissa was trying to fast-track both of those options, either legally or by pushing me out herself. I didn't flinch. I just nodded and said, "Tell me what I need to do." Tara told me the power of attorney Walter had left was never cancelled, which meant I still had control over some old trusts Marissa didn't even know existed. If we turned those accounts back on and linked the fake transactions to her, we can freeze her access and start an investigation, she said. I listened carefully, feeling my heart steady as I wrapped my fingers around my wedding ring. "And if I don't act fast?" I asked. "Then the IRS will think you were part of this," she said quietly. "They'll come for you first." That night, when I got home, I went straight to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. I opened the old fireproof box where Walter kept his most personal papers and found the instructions he'd written by hand almost 15 years ago. If anyone ever tries to force you out, don't argue. Turn on the backup accounts and call Tara. Trust her. I followed every step just like he told me. I logged into an old banking website and answered security questions. No one else could ever guess my childhood dog's name, Walter's old license plate, the street we first lived on. One by one, the dormant accounts came back to life on the screen. I didn't move any money. I only flagged the suspicious transfers Tara had already found. Then I logged out and picked up my notebook again. I started a new section. I wrote down every bank notification Marissa had sent to Derek's phone, every receipt I'd seen her tear up, every account statement she'd claimed was just a glitch. I didn't leave out a single thing. Meanwhile, Marissa kept acting like nothing was wrong. She spent her days lounging by the same pool where she nearly drowned me, taking phone calls I could hear from inside. She liked to talk loudly, dropping comments about how I was probably getting confused early, but I stayed quiet. I met with Tara one more time and handed her the flash drive with the audio I'd recorded in the hallway. She listened to it, paused, halfway, and looked up at me. "This is more than enough to start a case," she said. "You just need to hold steady." When I left that meeting, my shoulders felt square and strong for the first time in months. But later that night, when I walked back through the door, I found Marissa waiting at the kitchen island with a glass of wine and that same polished smile. "You've been out a lot lately," she said, sounding light and sweet, but her eyes were cold, feeling restless. I smiled right back. "Actually, no. I've never felt more focused." I poured myself a glass of water and didn't flinch when she said, "Maybe we should talk about you moving into a care home. Just something smaller, easier, quieter. You've done enough." I looked her in the eyes and said calmly, "You're right. I've done more than enough." Then I walked past her and went straight to bed, knowing that by this time next week, everything she'd stolen would be out of her reach. The next few days were strangely quiet, too quiet. Then Marissa started leaving fresh herbal tea by my bedroom door every morning. She'd never made me so much as a cup of coffee before. And now she was brewing my favorite mint tea and calling it a peace offering. The first time, I poured it straight down the drain. The second time, I saved it in a sealed jar and wrote the date on the label. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being careful. You learn that when someone's been circling your life with fake smiles and soft poisons. Tara had warned me that when people like Marissa feel control slipping away, they get dangerous. She was right. One night, I pretended to be asleep and left the hallway door cracked open with my audio recorder hidden just out of sight. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the doorknob turn. I stayed still, breathing slow. I heard soft footsteps come into my room and the sound of Marissa just standing over me. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, breathing, for a long, chilling minute. Then she left. That was all I needed. The next morning, I sent the recording to Tara with a short message. "She's escalating." By then, Tara had already filed the complaint with the state's financial crimes office. The evidence we'd collected was enough to freeze the accounts tied to the forged papers. We didn't even need the money itself. We just had to lock it down so Marissa couldn't drain it any further. That same afternoon, Derek got a call from the bank asking to confirm some suspicious activity. I sat in the living room and watched him turn bright red, yelling, "What do you mean the account's frozen?" While Marissa tried to calm him down, blaming some mix-up, Luke came home later that day. I pulled him into the garage and showed him everything: the sealed jars of tea, the audio recordings, and the receipts Marissa had been hiding behind the washing machine. Luxury purchases bought in my name. He looked at all of it without saying a word for a long time. Then, he took a deep breath and said, "Grandma, we need to go to the police." I nodded at Luke but said, "Not yet. Just one more move." I needed Marissa to slip up one last time, and she did. The next night I was sitting up in bed reading when she came into my room. She stood in the doorway holding another cup of tea. "I just want things to be easy for everyone," she said softly. I looked up at her, feeling completely steady. "Do you?" I asked. She walked over, set the cup on my nightstand, and leaned in too close. Her voice dropped low. "You've had a good life. Don't make it ugly at the end." Then she smiled, turned, and walked out like she hadn't just threatened me. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall. Then I picked up the cup carefully. With gloves, poured the tea into another jar, and packed it away with the others. The next morning, I handed everything over to Tara, the tea samples, my notes, the audio recordings. She passed it straight to law enforcement with a formal statement. That afternoon, Luke found Marissa in the garage, feeding papers into the shredder. They were property transfer documents, things she didn't want anyone to trace back to her. Right then, I knew the mask was finally coming off. Derek still tried to believe the best. He kept saying Marissa was just stressed, that everyone was misunderstanding her. But the next night, when the doorbell rang and 2 plainclothes agents handed me a copy of the protective order against Marissa for attempted elder abuse and financial fraud, even Derek couldn't pretend anymore. I turned to look at him. My voice was quiet. You married a woman who thinks a dead woman can't testify. You think she just wanted peace. He didn't answer. He sat down at the kitchen table, his hands shaking so badly I thought he might drop the papers. Out in the driveway, Marissa was screaming, calling this some sick mistake, but I knew better. This wasn't a mistake. This was the start of me taking my life back. The next morning, the whole house felt different, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Derek barely spoke. He just moved around stiff and hollow, like he was trying to pretend everything was still normal. Marissa, on the other hand, put on a show, wide wet eyes, quiet sobs, whispering on the phone about how everyone was betraying her. But even she knew she'd lost control. I kept calm, I watched, I made sure every step I took was careful. That afternoon, Luke came home early from college and pulled me aside. "Grandma," he said in a low voice, "the media is outside. There's a car parked across the street, a guy with a camera." I peeked through the blinds and saw the van with someone sitting inside, holding a big lens pointed at our house. "They're starting to cover it," Luke said. "They're calling it a quiet scandal, hidden elder abuse and financial fraud." I nodded once. I didn't care about headlines. All I ever wanted was the truth. Things moved fast after that. Just before dinner, 2 agents came back, this time with a court order and a small team from the Financial Crimes Unit. They walked right in without any apologies, handed Derek the paperwork, and told him that several accounts in his and Marissa's names had been flagged for illegal transfers and stolen data. I watched Derek's hands shake as he read each page. He kept mouthing the words, like if he read them enough times, they'd say something different. Marissa came running down the stairs in her robe, hair still wet, yelling, "You can't just barge in here, this is harassment." The lead agent didn't flinch. He read the charges out loud and told her to sit down. Then they started collecting documents, pulling hard drives, and asking for passwords. Marissa spun around, eyes wide. "Say something." She snapped at Derek. "Do something." But he just stared at her with a hollow, tired look and said, "You told me it was your money. You said it was just a restructure." That was when she completely lost it. She started screaming, calling everyone liars, accusing me of forging everything, of being bitter and crazy. But no one believed her anymore. Not with the flash drives, the video recordings, the signatures, and the forensic reports tracing every dollar she stole. I stood by the kitchen counter, saying nothing, until the lead agent turned to me. "Mrs. Benson, do you have anything else to submit?" I reached under the counter and pulled out the folder Walter had left me as original trust documents. My timeline of everything that happened, and the notarized witness statements from Tara and Luke. The agent looked through them, then gave me a respectful nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Benson. This helps tremendously." Marissa lunged toward me then, not to hit me, but with this desperate, wild look. Like she thought if she could just say one last thing, she could still twist the story. "You ungrateful witch," she hissed. "You wanted him all to yourself. You hated me from day one." I looked right into her eyes, calm as I'd ever been. "I wanted a daughter," I said. "What I got was a vulture." Luke stepped between us, quiet but firm, and told her to back off. The agents let her outside a few minutes later, in handcuffs yet, but treated like someone who'd probably end up needing them soon. Neighbors stood out on their porches, watching the scene. For the first time, Derek didn't defend her. He just sat at the kitchen table, face in his hands, whispering over and over, "I didn't know, I didn't know." I didn't answer. I couldn't fix him. I'd spent too many years trying to hold everyone together while they didn't care. When I fell apart, and when the front door closed behind the agents, and the house went quiet again, I finally felt like I could breathe. I walked upstairs, closed my door, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up scared. Something inside me finally went quiet, not because the storm was over, but because I had survived it. Now it was Marissa, who was drowning in her own mess. I started to believe maybe the worst had passed. Maybe the truth had finally settled in. 3 days after the agents came, the house finally felt like you could breathe again. Luke took time off school to stay close. Derek barely spoke, drifting from room to room like a ghost. I thought maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was ending. Then came the knock at the door. A plain white car pulled into the driveway. A uniformed police officer stepped out holding a clipboard. He was polite and soft-spoken, but his words hit me like a punch in the chest. "Mrs. Benson, we've received a report of alleged physical assault filed against you by Marissa Harrington. We're required to investigate." I stood there blinking, my mind blank for a second. "What?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though it felt like it could crack. He explained that Marissa had sent in photos of a bruise on her arm and claimed I'd gotten unstable and pushed her down during an argument 2 nights earlier. I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded more like a cough. Not because it was funny, because it was just so predictable. I invited him in, sat at the kitchen table, and handed over everything. The protective order, the audio recordings, notarized financial records, and the security logs that proved she hadn't even been near my room that night. He read through them slowly. He apologized for the trouble and said he'd make sure to include all the contradictions in his report, but the damage was done. That night, the local gossip websites picked up the story: wealthy widow accused of assaulting daughter-in-law amid financial scandal. The next day, Marissa posted a video online. She sat in some neutral-looking office, eyes red, voice soft and broken. "I've always tried to care for Eleanor like my own mother," she said. "But lately she's been erratic, paranoid. I never wanted this to go public, but I'm scared for my family." The comments poured in. Strangers who didn't know me at all called me jealous and bitter. They said they'd seen my kind before, that I was probably the real problem. I could hardly breathe reading it. Derek refused to talk about it. For a full day, I was afraid he might actually believe her, but Luke didn't let it slide. He gathered every piece of proof: video clips with timestamps, security logs, even old text messages from Marissa that completely contradicted her story. He took them all to the detective himself. He sat in the waiting room for hours until someone finally agreed to meet with him. When he got home, he looked tired but determined. "It's not over," he told me quietly. "She's being watched now. Everything she says is being recorded." I nodded and thanked him, trying not to let my voice shake, but inside, I felt that old, familiar ache, the hurt of being dragged through one more lie, one more humiliation, one more desperate attack from a woman who wouldn't stop until she buried me under her guilt. The next morning, Tara called. She said her contact at the district attorney's office was moving to indict Marissa within the month. "They're going to tear her defense apart, piece by piece," she said. "But you need to understand she's trying to delay that by making you look dangerous." "I understand," I told her. "Do what you have to do." That evening, Derek came into the kitchen while I was chopping onions. He just stood there for a long time, watching me. Finally, he spoke. Did you ever raise a hand to her?" he asked, voice small like a little boy. I put down the knife, wiped my hands on a towel, and looked him straight in the eye the same way I did when he was a kid trying to lie about broken glass. "No, Derek," I said calmly. "I never raised a hand. But I wish I'd raised my voice years ago." He nodded once, didn't say anything else, and walked out. It didn't fix everything, but that small crack in his certainty was enough to show me that the story was finally shifting. Marissa's lie hadn't landed the way she hoped. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was fireproof. And she was the one burning. The silence between Derek and me grew longer each day, broken only by the sounds of boxers being packed, drawers slamming, and old doors creaking open. The truth was finally too big to ignore. Marissa's accounts were frozen. Her fake charity was shut down. The people who had cheered for her online were turning on her as more of her crimes came out. She'd taken out loans in Derek's name, opened credit lines using my old address, and even forged Luke's signature to buy a car she never drove. The house, the place I'd spent decades turning into a home, was no longer theirs to ruin. When the foreclosure notice came by certified mail, I didn't feel happy about it. I didn't gloat, but I also didn't lift a finger to stop it. And when the movers finally came, I knew it was the end of her story, not mine. I stayed in the den, sipping my tea, while movers wrapped up the furniture I once picked out with Walter. It all looked like props from some failed play, just getting hauled off to nowhere. Derek moved into a little two-bedroom rental across town. Marissa, now officially charged with fraud, obstruction, and elder abuse, was out on bail but wasn't allowed to contact any of us. That didn't stop her from trying. She sent me a handwritten letter, messy and full of thin threats. Didn't even bother reading the whole thing. I handed it straight to Tara, who passed it on to the investigators. That same week, Luke asked if he could stay with me for a while. He said he couldn't stand watching his dad fall apart or act like any of this was normal. I said yes, right away. I set up the spare room and filled the fridge with all the meals he loved when he was little. One night, we were folding laundry together in the living room when he asked, "Do you think Dad will ever admit he knew more than he said?" I thought about it and said, maybe not out loud, but in the quiet moments, he'll know, and that's the part that'll haunt him. We didn't talk much about Marissa after that. It wasn't that we were avoiding it. It was that we were finally healing. The house felt smaller but safer. Every day I walked past the empty spaces she used to fill with her voice, her perfume, and her rules. I felt something tight inside my chest loosen a little more. One afternoon, Derek called. He sounded so tired when he came over. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, hair a mess, shirt all wrinkled, eyes dark and hollow. He sat across from me at the table, took a deep breath, and said, "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to say, I'm sorry I saw things, and I let them slide. I should have spoken up the day she pushed you into the pool." I listened without interrupting. When he was done, I nodded and said, "I never needed an apology, Derek. I needed a witness. Someone to say it happened. Someone who didn't pretend it was a joke." He looked down, and I saw something break in him, something brittle he'd been holding on to too long. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. A few minutes later, he got up and left quietly, like someone stepping away from a grave. I wasn't angry. I just finally understood how high the price was for pretending everything was fine, and I wasn't willing to pay it anymore. The next morning, I stood out on the porch with my coffee. It was the same porch Marissa once called too old to be charming. I watched the sunrise and smiled because I finally knew what freedom felt like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and real, and I had earned it. After Derek's visit, something in me settled, not because everything was fixed, but because there was nothing left to fake anymore. And when you stop pretending, you start to breathe differently. Luke started spending more evenings with me, sitting on that porch and asking gentle questions about my life before all this, before the pool, before Marissa, before the house turned into something we all had to survive. One night, he asked, "Did you ever think about leaving when she first showed up?" I told him the truth. I thought about it a lot, but leaving wasn't just about packing a bag. It meant losing part of my son. It meant watching him be shaped by someone who looked sweet in public and cut like a razor in private, and the thought of losing him completely kept me here until I didn't recognize my own voice anymore. He nodded. He didn't judge. He just understood, the way he always did. Then he asked if we could look at my old photo albums. We stayed up late flipping through them: birthdays, Christmas mornings, old vacations. In the middle of it, I found my backup phone, the one I kept in a drawer with emergency numbers and expired coupons. I didn't remember there was still a voicemail saved on it. I pressed play. Walter's voice came through, steady and rough, left years ago before one of his trips. "Ellie, I know you'll outlive the rest of us. And when you do, don't let them push you out of your own life. Don't be the one who always forgives and always disappears. Fight if you have to. Just don't let them forget who you are." Luke sat perfectly still as it ended. He looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. "He knew," he said softly. Even then, I nodded, too choked up to answer. The next day, we drove to the local veteran center where Walter used to volunteer every other Thursday. I handed them a quiet donation, one of the first things I did, not out of fear, but out of choice. I used some of the money Walter had set aside, the funds that were finally back in my name, to make a donation. I didn't do it to prove anything to anyone. I did it because that's how our marriage always worked best. Quiet acts of kindness, simple dignity. When I went to the Veterans Center to deliver the check, the woman at the desk, a kind lady in her 50s with strong hands and soft eyes, saw Walter's name and hugged me right away. "We've missed him," she said. "We miss people like that." That evening, Luke started filling out his application to transfer into a financial ethics program at the university here. He told me he wanted to do something honest, something that mattered. He asked if I'd help him prepare his application, and I said yes without thinking twice. While I read over his essay, I couldn't help but smile. I saw so much of Walter in him: steady, fair, thoughtful. It hit me then that I didn't need the money or the headlines or revenge. What I needed was right in front of me, someone who hadn't forgotten who I was. Later, I cleaned out the last drawer in my bedroom. I tossed out old pens that didn't work, mismatched socks, crumpled receipts. At the very back, I found something I hadn't touched in over 10 years, a sealed envelope that said, "Only if you lose yourself." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, written in Walter's handwriting. No legal instructions, no account numbers, just a list of all the ways he thought I was strong. At the bottom, he'd written, "When they try to erase you, write louder, you are not replaceable." I folded the letter back up and tucked it into the drawer by my bed, not to protect me anymore, but to remind me. I wasn't quiet because I was weak. I was quiet because I was saving my voice for when it mattered most. And now, finally, it did. 1 year later, on a breezy Sunday that didn't feel heavy with anything anymore, I hosted a small get-together in the backyard of my new home. It was a modest place, with white shutters and a little garden. I looked after myself, nothing fancy but exactly enough. That day, I set out folding chairs and a checkered tablecloth. I baked the same peach cobbler Walter used to brag about at church potlucks. Luke showed up early with paper plates and his laptop. He was excited to show me the first A he'd earned in his new program. We set everything up together, just like we used no tension, no pretending. Derek arrived later. He was quiet, sober, carrying a small wooden box filled with old photos he'd found while packing up. Pictures of my wedding, of him as a little boy sitting on Walter's lap, and one I hadn't seen in years, the three of us smiling under the oak tree Marissa once called an eyesore. He didn't ask for forgiveness, but he didn't have to. Sometimes, just showing up after the truth comes out is its own apology. So I let him stay. There was no music, just laughter, the clink of lemonade glasses, and my wind chime dancing over the patio. After everyone ate and the sun was starting to set, Luke stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. He cleared his throat and looked at me with that same steady look Walter always had. "To my grandmother," he said, voice strong, "who didn't just survive, hell, she took it apart one piece at a time and built something better. You taught me that being quiet doesn't mean being weak. It means, watch me." Everyone clapped, soft but sure. My heart felt so full I could hardly speak. I stood up slowly, raised my glass, and said, "They thought I was easy to erase. But some of us write our own endings." No one needed more words than that. It was the truth. After dessert, Derek came over by the flower bed. He stared down at the dirt, like he was looking for answers. "You ever think about her now?" he asked. He meant Marissa, who was still waiting for her trial date because more charges kept piling up: fraud, identity theft, tampering with medication. "No," I said. "Thinking about her would be giving her a room in a house I've already taken back." He nodded. There was a little shame in his eyes, but I didn't rub it in. That part of my life was over. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stepped out on the porch alone. I opened a small tin box where I'd kept my last piece of unfinished business, a forged will Marissa had tried to plant in my drawer, unsigned, to look like I'd left everything to her. I took it out, struck a match, and watched it burn into ash. Then I closed the lid, stepped back into the house, and turned off the light. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. The kind of whole you only feel when every piece of you has been tested, and nothing broke beyond repair. My name was mine again. My life was quiet again. And for the first time in years, I slept with the window open, unafraid. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.